Gatekeeping. The one thing keeping legitimate Kung Fu alive. Gatekeeping. The thing that killed legitimate Kung Fu. What's up, everybody? This is Vincent Tseng, the Wandering Warrior. And today I want to touch upon a topic that came as a result of someone's comment on one of my videos. Don't just learn Kung Fu moves. Hashtag martial arts. Sean Bui 2724 said, personally, I used to advocate for this stance. Now I advocate for gatekeeping. It's just not meant for everyone to understand, and I refuse to allow the martial arts become bastardized by arrogant, greedy, prideful, quote-unquote, martial artists. Just look at what they did to Muay Thai. You are explaining the universal concepts of combat and the underlying Tao. This applies to all combat. These are secrets for a reason, not because we hide them, but because the people refuse to see them. Okay, now I wrote, hey, thanks for the comment. I can understand your perspective, and I think I will talk about this in an upcoming video. And that's what I'm doing right now. So, is it right to gatekeep legitimate Kung Fu? Gatekeeping. What a loaded word. The thing that has kept legitimate Kung Fu alive. The very thing that destroyed legitimate Kung Fu. Now first, let us define what exactly is gatekeeping. Now, as I understand it, gatekeeping is trying to actively control who has access to certain resources or knowledge or skills and who can't, right? If you imagine there's a whole body of knowledge, there's a gate in front of it, and you're standing in front of the gate, deciding who gets to enter and who doesn't get to enter. It's about as simple as that. Now, as far as I can tell, there are pros and cons to gatekeeping. Sometimes it gets a good rep, sometimes it gets a bad rep. As far as gatekeeping is concerned, I think there are a few pros, right? The people that are the gatekeepers oftentimes are the ones that are upholding culture and tradition. And so by maintaining the culture and the tradition behind an activity, in this case, martial arts, they ensure that that context isn't lost, that it is directly connected to what came before, tradition, and that there is an ingrained behavioral transmission that is taking place. So it kind of ensures that this thing lives on, right? It's just not just a sterilized, uncultured system and way of doing things, but it's actually firmly rooted in culture. Culture comes from lifestyle. So in many ways, it becomes this organic thing that is the interplay between people and their environment and how they live their lives. Gatekeepers also ought to be quite specialized and experienced. So you imagine they are maintaining the culture and traditions of a folk fighting culture, then they should be quite specialized in its usage and very experienced in that usage. They should be very well trained and knowledgeable, and they've probably used it quite a bit. You can already see where some of this may or may not apply for traditional Chinese martial arts, but ideally that's what a gatekeeper should have, right? They should have a lot of experience, and they should have a lot of specialized depth of knowledge when it comes to the stuff beyond the gate. Ideally, gatekeepers also maintain quality, right? So assuming they know the context that the culture comes from, they understand the traditions of that culture, they understand and are specialized in the knowledge base passed down by those traditions, and they're very experienced in utilizing that knowledge base, they should therefore have a good understanding of quality, and they should be something of like a quality control on the community of people that are entering and then utilizing what's beyond the gate, right? So ideally, a gatekeeper is doing a really good job. Except we know that that's not always the case. There are cons to gatekeeping, right? So the first one that comes to mind is that the biases of the gatekeeper oftentimes affects their performance. So let's just say you are racist. You inherently think certain people are inferior to you and don't deserve to be learning this type of stuff. Well, you might be missing out on a huge talent pool of people. Never mind the fact that racism is, depending on your sense of morality, inherently wrong. You may be biased in terms of having a bias in how you utilize the skill set that you are gatekeeping. So if you yourself are very biased in how you utilize it, it's more your style on it rather than the system itself, then you're going to be very biased in how you let people in and how you let them interact with that skill base. Unless you have a whole bunch of other gatekeepers with you, other masters, other teachers, other instructors, other coaches that can help even things out. If you're just one person and your biases are running the show, or you're letting your biases run the show, then you're going to skew the results that people get out of accessing that knowledge base. So biases have an extremely outsized impact when there are gatekeepers involved, especially when there's only a few. If we can shop around for the same skill set but many different teachers, well then, one gatekeeper doesn't make or break the whole thing. However, if you're taking an example where one guy went to Hong Kong or Taiwan in the 70s, learned something, we don't know how well he learned it, we don't know how much he was taught, but he came back to the West and said, yeah, I've got this amazing Chinese martial arts system and I am its gatekeeper, essentially. Well, we don't know what the previous gatekeeper gave them, and we don't know how much they're able to give the next generation, right? Something to think about. Gatekeepers can sometimes shun improvements. See, this is where the ego comes into play. They may think that the way they went through it is the way you have to go through it. They may think that they got the best of the best and therefore that's what you're getting. Nothing can be improved upon. They might get overly comfortable with the way things are currently being done, but they may forget that culture is a living thing that continues to evolve, and that traditions of that culture are based on what has come before, but what came before was still subject to dynamic changes in human society, in nature, in the ecology, in the environment, right? So there's this tendency for people to, especially as they age, to kind of set things in stone and not want to change, not want to improve. The ego makes them think that everything they did was the best and there can be no better. And while logically we understand that that's false, that's a very seductive concept to people who are, especially to people who are fragile of ego, but also people who are no longer developing. They're no longer innovating. They've become complacent. As an aside, what I would say to people like that is, even if you aren't the one pushing the boundaries, sharpening the tools anymore, at the very least, preside over an environment where you can help others do that if you're no longer that person. And that leads me to my last one, which is that a lot of times ineffective gatekeepers are ones who do not adapt to changes. The world is dynamic. Things are constantly in flux, things are shifting. And if you are a gatekeeper of a certain body of knowledge, and that body of knowledge exists from a certain place and time, does that place and time still exist? Right? You must ask yourself, are you a preservationist of something that is no longer relevant or losing its relevance? Or are you the gatekeeper of a living body of knowledge that continues to be adapted for the modern day? Something to think about. So, truthfully, I do think some amount of gatekeeping is good or even necessary. It's up to instructors to define what qualities they want to see before they allow someone to learn more. After all, we are teaching people how to beat up and possibly end other human beings. As traditional Chinese martial artists, we are also holders of the folk fighting cultures of China in its diverse forms. This is bigger than any one person, and it is a responsibility. There's many examples of people who show up in a field just for the clout or passing interest. Eventually, they may get bored or not get what they want from the niche and move on. But that said, while newcomers are generally a good thing, they can cause damage. They can cheapen the whole experience. Showing up means you can take part, but taking part doesn't qualify any one person to take over the discourse. I think we can argue that some amount of gatekeeping is good, even if it's partly self-interest on top of the transmission and quality of the arts moving forward. So, who gets to enter the gate? What is the criteria? Now, once upon a time, many Chinese martial arts masters would have had their criteria very clearly outlined in their own heads. Family and close friends. Or they would choose based on loyalty and ability, right? You got your outdoor students and you have your indoor students. The indoor ones are the ones that have shown ability and loyalty. They're your enforcers. They're your thugs. They're your soldiers. For others, it was ethnicity or even your own town or village, right? People that were associated with your clan. Those people, you want them to be able to defend themselves. Other people, they can, whatever, right? They don't matter to you. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and they don't matter. But, in the 1900s, as things opened up more and as the Chinese martial arts started getting disseminated in a very different way, we start seeing this like expansion and commercialization. And we definitely see changes made to the Chinese martial arts as far as how they're trained, how they're taught, how they are being perceived of, in order to make it more palatable to the changing market. And in this process, we do see a lot of these Kung Fu gatekeepers do things that aren't necessarily good for the outlook in the future of the traditional Chinese martial arts as fighting systems. Very good for conning people, or very good for milking money out of students, or very good for, an exercise in the park, or very good as a kids program, or whatever it is they need to do to keep the lights on and pay the bills and make money. And that's understandable from a business standpoint, for sure. But that said, they were the gatekeepers, and many of them did things that were not so good for the outcome of the traditional martial arts. Now, that's not to say that nobody passed on anything legitimate. That's not to say that people didn't have amazing bits and pieces or very good personal styles that came from these systems. They definitely did. However, by and large, there has been a lot of diluting or cheapening of what these things were into what they are today. And what they are today often does not produce fighters. So, end of conversation on that. If you guys want more on that, I do discuss it in my other video, Killing Kung Fu, which was relatively successful. And if you're curious about the whys and the socioeconomics of why Kung Fu might have declined, check that out. Link is somewhere around here. But back on gatekeeping. Going back to the pros and cons, we can see where gatekeepers failed the traditional Chinese martial arts. There are certainly gatekeepers more interested in their own profit over the skills and welfare of their own students. There are definitely martial arts cults. We see them in the same social dynamics and psychologies that are playing out in today's MMA and BJJ. We see traditional Chinese martial arts masters treat the martial arts as a cultural relic and a collection of forms rather than a living fighting culture. And this brings the traditional Chinese martial arts down a dangerous path of imperfect preservation and decay. We can see Chinese boxing gatekeepers unwilling to adopt improved training methodologies or getting extremely dogmatic about training regimens, sometimes taken out of context. So while many factors are out of their control, many factors were in their control, and often they either didn't adapt to the changing times or squeeze their privilege for what it has been worth during the global Kung Fu craze. Yet, it's because of the torchbearers of Chinese martial arts culture that any of this even survives to this day. So, what does this tell us? For me, at least, this tells me that effective gatekeepers are always adapting. We live in a dynamic world. It's constantly changing, right? Even changing in ways that we cannot perceive just yet. To deny that is to deny reality. And if nothing else, the martial arts, the fighting skills, they exist within a very real crucible called combat. And so if it's not serving the purpose of making you good at that, it's not serving its true purpose or its original purpose at all. If you refuse to adapt, you are resigning yourself to become obsolete. Now, if you fight the battle, you may win, you may lose. But if you do not fight the battle, you definitely can still lose. So it behooves you to fight the battle. And this battle is the battle of adapting with changing times. Another thing that this tells me is that effective gatekeepers embrace improvements. Improvements are how we ensure that something stays top-notch. And these improvements may not even be a fundamental change in the strategic doctrine, the movement meta, and the techniques used within a system. Improvements may be as simple as, we can use gamified drilling so that people learn faster. Improvements could be, we're going to use some modern exercise equipment to help us gain certain physical attributes more efficiently, right? Improvements can be done in many ways, not just in the technical, but also in the approach to training methodology, otherwise known as pedagogy, right? Improvements can be made in many, many places. And our martial arts come from the late Qing dynasty, where they had hundreds of years, if not at least a few generations, of improving, passing it down, using it, figuring new things out, cross-training, improving, and passing it down. And if we are following the spirit of people engaged in that type of lifestyle, shouldn't we be doing the same? On the topic of biases, I would say effective gatekeepers are responsible. They understand the responsibilities of their position. They understand that they need to introspect. They understand that they need to understand not only the body of knowledge that they possess and gatekeep, but they should also understand their own biases. They should also understand their own limitations. And they should also understand that, say, for many of these martial arts, there is a system, there's a template, there's a pattern, there's taolu guiding your progression, and yet there was a family structure around this. Especially for the Chinese martial arts, there's very often this family concept. Yes, your shi fu, skill father, is your main teacher, and yet you have your kung fu uncles and older brothers and older sisters who are also there to guide you in an important, if not more important sometimes, method. And in a way that's just as important, or if not more important at times, because this is a whole ecosystem of skilled people rather than just one source of information. Many perspectives on the same thing. Cross-pollination of ideas, right? So when you are a gatekeeper, I think it behooves you to be responsible, to be understanding, and to really contemplate this type of stuff. Being a gatekeeper should not be an easy task. I think gatekeepers should not only maintain quality, but also constantly be reevaluating what that means. There was a time when having a bunch of outdoor students paying you and having a handful of indoor students that you could trust and could really fight, that is a quality situation. However, these days, I would say if out of a gym of 100 people, only 2 of them can really fight, that is low quality. Those are poor results. Out of 100 people, only 2 could fight, you got a 2% success rate. People are paying you, right? I would say the societal standards today are a bit different. And so what does quality mean? What does a good result mean? What should you be aiming for? These things need to be adjusted with the times. If you're not worried about monopolizing fight knowledge and keeping it amongst only a few trusted peers, then maybe you're going to move a little different. You're going to do things a little different. I think effective gatekeeping also involves understanding the culture and the traditions of that culture. But maybe more importantly, understanding that culture comes from an environment and lifestyle. The interaction of that lifestyle and that environment create culture and traditions that are passed on. And the environments and lifestyles change, and they certainly have changed between the end of the Qing Dynasty and today. So how are we going to distill and maintain the spirit of that culture and those traditions and what they're trying to accomplish, and as much of, the good stuff that they came up with, while adapting the culture and traditions for what is today the modern lifestyle and environment of the practitioners? Now guys, this is also very personal to me, right? Because I'm working on Tan Tui. I make no secret of it. You guys know this. I'm working on Tan Tui, primarily extracting from the Jingwu Athletic Association's version, Tan Tui 12路, Tan Tui 12 roads. And as I go through the 12 roads of Tan Tui, as I analyze all the different explanations for all the different applications and techniques, as I look at what is Changquan, what was the fighting like in Shandong, right, during the 1800s, 1900s, what are we looking at? How can I better understand it? And how can I better communicate and transmit that to you guys? As I contemplate all this, I recognize that, well, the more practical and fight effective my Tan Tui and my Tan Tui training is, and it's getting there, I become a gatekeeper of this body of knowledge. And so, is that good? Is that bad? What's good or bad about it? How should I go about this? These are things I've been thinking about. And if you have thoughts on gatekeeping, whether that's been good or bad for Kung Fu, and what you would like to see out of the community, any thoughts that you have, comment down below. Let me know. Let's have a discussion about this stuff. In any case, as always, thank you for joining me on my journey. I salute yours. Peace.